In the unforgiving frontier town of Red Hollow, Ethan Hale is branded as weak, too quiet, too gentle for a land that devours the soft-hearted. When Clara Vance arrives from the city and sees past the town's judgment, choosing him becomes her act of defiance. But in a world where reputation means survival, their bond ignites a firestorm of doubt and scorn. Can a man dismissed by everyone prove his worth when the entire town expects him to fail? Will quiet strength triumph over loud judgment? Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The dust never settled in Red Hollow. It hung in the air like unfinished business, coating the wooden storefronts and the men who leaned against them, watching, always watching. The town had a way of measuring a person before they'd spoken a word, and Ethan Hale had been measured long ago, found wanting by standards he'd never agreed to but couldn't escape. He rode into town that Tuesday morning with a wagon load of firewood, the mare pulling steady despite the ruts in the road. The sun wasn't high yet, but the heat already pressed down like a hand on his shoulders. Ethan kept his hat low, eyes on the street ahead, knowing full well that eyes were on him. "There goes Hale," someone muttered from the mercantile steps. "Surprised he can lift those logs." Laughter followed. Not cruel exactly, but not kind either. The kind of laughter that came easy when a man had already been decided upon. Ethan didn't turn. He'd learned young that responding only fed it. His father had taught him that, one of the few useful things the old man had passed down before drinking himself into an early grave. "Let them talk," he'd said. "Words only hurt if you give them room." But room or not, they found their way in. He pulled the wagon to a stop outside Brennan's general store, setting the brake and climbing down. His boots hit the dirt with barely a sound. Everything about Ethan was like that. Understated, easy to overlook. He wasn't tall, though he wasn't short either. His build was lean, muscled from work, but not the kind that drew admiration. His face was plain, weathered by sun and wind, with eyes that stayed mostly on the ground. "Morning, Ethan." Tom Brennan stepped out, wiping his hands on his apron. He was a decent man, one of the few who treated Ethan with something resembling respect. "Morning, Tom. Got your order." "Good, good. Let's get it unloaded." They worked in silence, hauling the split logs to the storage shed out back. Ethan moved with practiced efficiency, each motion economical, nothing wasted. He'd been chopping wood since he was 10, and his hands knew the rhythm better than his mind did. When they finished, Tom paid him in coins that clinked soft in Ethan's palm. "You need anything while you're here?" "Just some flour and salt. Maybe coffee if you've got it." "Got it. Come on in." Inside, the store smelled of leather and tobacco, dried goods and dust. A couple of men stood near the counter, and their conversation died the moment Ethan walked in. He felt their eyes, but didn't meet them. He never did. Tom measured out the flour and salt, wrapped the coffee in brown paper. "Heard you're thinking of expanding your herd," he said, voice deliberately casual. "Thinking about it." "That's good. Land like yours, you could do well with cattle." One of the men by the counter snorted. "If he can handle them, cattle ain't like chopping wood, Hale. They fight back." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "I'll manage. Sure you will." The man, Porter, a ranch hand from the big spread south of town, grinned like he'd won something. "Just don't come crying when they run you over." Ethan took his goods, paid Tom, and walked out. The laughter followed him again, lighter this time, almost friendly. That was the worst part. They didn't hate him. They just didn't take him seriously. He loaded the supplies into the wagon and was about to climb up when he heard it. A voice that didn't belong. "Excuse me, could you tell me where I might find the boarding house?" Ethan turned. A woman stood a few feet away, travel bag in hand, dust on her skirt. She was maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that looked like they'd seen more than Red Hollow had to offer. Her face was angular, not soft, and there was something in the way she held herself, straight-backed, deliberate, that set her apart from the women who'd grown up here. "It's 2 blocks down," Ethan said, pointing. "On the left, sign out front." "Thank you." She studied him for a moment, her gaze direct in a way that made him uncomfortable. Not unkind, just assessing. "You're very helpful." He nodded, uncertain how to respond, and climbed onto the wagon. As he guided the mare back onto the street, he glanced back once. She was still standing there, watching him with that same curious expression. He thought nothing of it. Clara Vance had been back in Red Hollow for 3 days, and she already remembered why she'd left. The town hadn't changed. Same dusty streets, same wooden buildings that looked like they might blow over in a strong wind, same men standing around with nothing better to do than judge. She'd grown up here, left at 18 to find work in Denver, and spent 12 years learning that the world was bigger and meaner and more complicated than Red Hollow could ever imagine. But her mother's letters had grown shaky, the words wandering across the page like lost children, and Clara had known it was time to come back. Not forever, just long enough to make sure the old woman didn't fade away alone. "You'll stay at the house, of course," her mother had said, her voice thin but insistent. "It's still your home." It didn't feel like home. It felt like a place she'd outgrown, a coat that no longer fit. She'd spent the first 2 days settling in, unpacking her trunk, fielding visits from neighbors who wanted to hear about the city and offer their opinions on everything from her unmarried status to her modern clothes. By the 3rd day, she needed air. That's when she'd seen him, the man with the firewood. There was something about the way he'd carried himself, quiet and unhurried, that had caught her attention. Not because he was handsome, though there was a certain ruggedness to him, but because he moved through the town like a ghost, present but unseen. She'd asked around, found out his name was Ethan Hale, that he ran a small ranch about an hour's ride north that he kept to himself, and that no one thought much of him. "Poor boy," Mrs. Calloway had said, shaking her head over tea. "Never quite measured up after his father passed. Too gentle for this kind of life." "Gentle how?" Clara had asked. "Oh, you know. Doesn't drink, doesn't fight, doesn't make much noise. Not what you'd call a real man out here." Clara had bitten her tongue. She'd heard that kind of talk before, men defining manhood by volume and violence, as if quiet strength didn't exist. It was lazy thinking, and it irritated her. A week later, she saw him again, this time at the livery, checking the shoes on his mare. She'd gone there to arrange for a horse, thinking she might explore the land she'd forgotten, and there he was, crouched low, running his hand along the mare's foreleg with a gentleness that surprised her. "Is she all right?" Clara asked. Ethan looked up, startled. "Oh, yes, ma'am. Just making sure. She's been favoring this side a bit." "You're careful with her. She's been good to me. Seems right to return it." Clara smiled. "That's a rare philosophy." He didn't seem to know what to make of that, so he just nodded and went back to his work. But Clara didn't leave. She watched him finish, watched the way his hands moved, sure, practiced, kind. When he stood, she spoke again. "I'm Clara Vance. I just moved back." "Ethan Hale." He tipped his hat. "Welcome back." "Thank you. Though I'm not sure welcome is the word I'd use for this place." A faint smile crossed his face, gone almost before it appeared. "It grows on you." "Like a fungus?" This time he actually laughed, a short, surprise sound that seemed to catch him off guard. "Something like that." They talked for a few more minutes, nothing important. The weather, the state of the roads, where she'd been. He didn't ask much, but he listened in a way that felt genuine. When she finally left, she realized she'd enjoyed the conversation more than any she'd had since returning. It became a pattern. She'd find reasons to be in town when he came in for supplies, and they'd talk. Brief exchanges, nothing that would raise eyebrows, but enough that she started to see past the quiet exterior. Ethan wasn't weak. He was contained. There was a difference. But the town didn't see it, and the more Clara was seen talking to him, the more people started to notice. "You're spending a lot of time with Hale," her mother said one evening, her tone carefully neutral. "He's good company." Well, he's not much, Clara. You could do better." "Better how?" Her mother hesitated. "A woman your age, back from the city, people will talk if you're not careful. Let them talk." But it wasn't that simple, and Clara knew it. In a town like Red Hollow, talk could curdle into something uglier. Reputation was currency, and she was spending hers on a man the town had already written off. She didn't care. Or she told herself she didn't. The storm hit on a Thursday, rolling in from the west with a fury that seemed personal. Ethan saw it coming from miles away, the sky turning bruised dark, the wind picking up until it howled through the gaps in the barn. He worked quickly, securing the animals, checking the fences, hauling tools inside before they became projectiles. By the time the rain started, he was soaked through and breathing hard. The storm battered the ranch with a violence that felt almost alive, wind tearing at the roof, rain driving sideways. He'd weathered worse, but not by much. It lasted 3 hours. When it finally passed, the damage was clear. 2 sections of fence were down, the chicken coop had lost half its roof, and a tree had fallen across the path to the road. Ethan stood in the mud, surveying it all, and felt the weight settle on him like wet canvas. He could fix it, he always did. But it would take days, and he was already behind on other work. He started with the fences, hauling posts and wire out to the far pasture. The ground was soft from the rain, which made digging easier but walking harder. His boots sank with every step, mud sucking at his heels. By midday, his back ached and his hands were raw, but he kept going. That's when he heard the horse. He looked up, squinting against the sun that had finally broken through the clouds. A rider was approaching, picking their way carefully over the fallen branches. As they got closer, he recognized her. Clara. She reined in a few feet away, swinging down from the saddle with an ease that spoke of practice. "Heard about the storm," she said. "Thought you might need a hand." Ethan stared at her, too surprised to speak. "I can work," she continued. "I'm not delicate. I didn't—" He stopped, unsure what he'd meant to say. "You don't have to." "I know, but I'm here anyway." She tied her horse to a post and walked over, surveying the damage with a practical eye. "Where do you want to start?" They worked side by side for hours, rebuilding the fence line. Clara didn't complain, didn't slow down, didn't treat the work as beneath her. She held posts steady while Ethan drove them into the ground, stretched wire while he hammered staples, matched his pace without trying to prove anything. They didn't talk much. The work said enough. When the sun started to dip, they'd finished one section and made good progress on the second. Ethan straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead, and looked at her. She was mud-streaked and tired, her hair coming loose from its pins, and she looked more real than anyone he'd seen in a long time. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." "Why'd you come out here?" Clara met his eyes. "Because you needed help, and because I wanted to." Something shifted in the air between them, unspoken but understood. Ethan felt it settle in his chest, warm and unsettling. "People will talk," he said quietly. "They already are." "It'll get worse." "Probably." She smiled, a little crooked. "I've survived worse than gossip." They finished the second section as twilight fell, working by the last of the light. When Clara finally mounted her horse to leave, Ethan walked her to the property line. "Come back if you want," he said. "For work or just to visit?" "I will." She rode off into the dusk, and Ethan stood watching until she disappeared. The ranch felt quieter without her, but not emptier. If anything, it felt fuller than it had in years. The talk started almost immediately. "Saw Clara Vance out at the Hale place," someone said at the general store. "What was she doing out there?" "Helping with storm damage, from what I heard." "Helping? That girl's been in the city too long. She doesn't know what she's getting into." "Hale's not exactly a catch." "He's not exactly anything." Clara heard the whispers but didn't acknowledge them. Her mother, however, did. "This has to stop," she said one evening, her voice sharp with worry. "You're making yourself a target." "For what? Being kind?" "For associating with a man who can't provide, can't protect, can't—" "Can't what, Mother? Can't meet some arbitrary standard that doesn't mean anything?" Her mother's face tightened. "It means everything out here. You know that. I know people waste their lives worrying about what others think. And you've decided to throw yours away on Ethan Hale?" Clara stood, her patience fraying. "I haven't decided anything except that he's worth knowing. That's more than I can say for most people in this town." She left before her mother could respond, stepping out into the night air. The stars were thick overhead, indifferent and beautiful. She thought about Ethan out on his ranch, alone under the same sky, and wondered if he was thinking about her too. He was. Ethan couldn't explain it, even to himself. He'd spent most of his life invisible, and he'd made peace with that. Invisibility was safe. It didn't invite expectations he couldn't meet or judgments he couldn't change. But Clara saw him, not the version of him the town had decided on, but the actual man, flawed, uncertain, doing his best. And being seen, really seen, was terrifying. It was also intoxicating. She came back the following week, and the week after that. Sometimes to help with work, sometimes just to talk. They'd sit on the porch as the sun went down, drinking coffee that was too strong and talking about everything and nothing. She told him about Denver, about the job she'd had in a hotel, the people she'd met, the things she'd learned. He told her about the ranch, about the seasons and the animals, about the quiet satisfaction of building something with your hands. They didn't talk about the town's opinion. It hovered between them like smoke, present but unacknowledged. One evening, after they'd spent the day mending the chicken coop, Clara turned to him with a directness that caught him off guard. "Why do you let them talk about you like that?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "What would you have me do?" "Defend yourself. Show them they're wrong. They don't want to be shown. They've already decided. Then change their minds." He smiled, but it was sad. "I've tried that. It doesn't work. People believe what they want to believe." "So you just accept it?" "I accept that I can't control what they think. I can only control what I do." Clara studied him, her expression thoughtful. "That's either very wise or very cowardly." "Maybe both." She laughed, the sound cutting through the tension. "You're more complicated than they give you credit for." "Most people are." They sat in silence after that, watching the stars emerge one by one. Ethan thought about courage, about what it meant to stand up and what it meant to endure. He'd never been the kind of man who fought with fists or loud words, but that didn't mean he wasn't fighting. It just meant his battles were quieter. By the time autumn arrived, the entire town knew. Clara Vance and Ethan Hale, the woman who'd left and the man who'd stayed, the city girl and the quiet rancher. People couldn't make sense of it, and what they couldn't understand, they criticized. "She's settling," they said. "He's punching above his weight. It won't last. She'll come to her senses." But Clara didn't come to her senses. If anything, she doubled down. She helped him bring in the harvest, small as it was. She sat with him at the town dances, ignoring the pointed looks and whispered comments. She introduced him to visitors as if he were someone worth knowing, and slowly, grudgingly, a few people started to wonder if maybe they'd missed something. But most didn't. Most watched and waited for the inevitable collapse. Ethan felt the weight of it every time he went into town. The skepticism, the pity, the certainty that he wasn't enough. It wore on him in ways he didn't talk about, eroding the fragile confidence he'd built over years of solitude. One night, unable to sleep, he stood on the porch and stared out at the dark land. The ranch stretched before him, modest and hard-won, a testament to years of work that no one acknowledged. He thought about Clara, about the way she'd chosen him despite everything, and he felt something close to terror. What if they were right? What if he wasn't enough? The thought sat heavy in his chest, cold and familiar. He'd carried it his whole life, this sense of falling short, and no amount of work or silence had dislodged it. But then he thought about the way Clara looked at him, steady, certain, without pity. She didn't see a failure. She saw a man. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it had to be. He went back inside, the night closing around the ranch like a held breath, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow he'd wake early, feed the animals, check the fences, continue the endless work of keeping a life together. And maybe, if he was lucky, Clara would come by again. That hope, small and stubborn, was all he needed. The first frost came early that year, turning the grass brittle and the mornings sharp. Ethan woke to find ice crusted on the water trough, the kind of cold that made every breath visible and every movement deliberate. He broke the ice with the blunt end of an axe, watching the shards scatter across the frozen surface, and thought about how winter always arrived like an unwelcome guest, expected but never truly prepared for. Clara came by that afternoon, her cheeks pink from the ride, a basket hooked over her arm. She'd taken to bringing things, bread she'd baked, preserves her mother had put up, once a shirt she'd mended without being asked. Ethan had protested at first, uncomfortable with the charity of it, but she'd waved him off. "It's not charity," she'd said. "It's what people do." He'd wanted to argue that people didn't do that for him, but he'd kept quiet. The truth was harder to say out loud. She found him in the barn, mucking out stalls, and leaned against the doorframe watching. He looked up, straightened, pushed his hat back. "Didn't hear you right up. You were focused." She stepped inside, setting the basket on a hay bale. "Brought stew. Figured you could use something hot." "You didn't have to." "I know." She smiled. "But I did anyway." They ate together in the barn, sitting on upturned crates, the stew warming them from the inside. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose boards. Clara pulled her shawl tighter. "This place gets cold," she said. "It does. You manage all right out here alone?" Ethan considered the question. "I manage." "That's not the same as being all right." He glanced at her, caught off guard by the observation. "No, I suppose it's not." She didn't press, just finished her stew and set the bowl aside. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that had developed between them over weeks of shared work and quiet conversations. Ethan had forgotten what that felt like, being comfortable with another person, not having to fill every silence with words. "People are saying things," Clara said finally. "They always do. About us." "I figured." She turned to face him fully. "Does it bother you?" Ethan set his bowl down, wiped his hands on his pants. "What bothers me is that it might bother you. I asked about you, not me." "I know." He met her eyes. "And I'm telling you that I can handle what they say about me. I've had years of practice. But if they start saying things that hurt you, that make your life harder, that bothers me." Clara's expression softened. "I'm tougher than I look." "I don't doubt that." "Then stop worrying about me and answer the question. Does it bother you?" He thought about it, really thought about it. "Sometimes, not the words themselves, but what's behind them. The assumption that I'm not, that I can't." He trailed off, frustrated by his inability to articulate it. "That you're not good enough," Clara finished quietly. "Yeah." "And do you believe them?" The question hung between them, heavy and unavoidable. Ethan wanted to say no, wanted to claim a confidence he'd never felt. But Clara deserved honesty, and lying would cheapen what they were building. "Some days," he admitted. "Some days I do." She nodded, not with pity, but with understanding. "I believed things about myself for a long time too, that I was too difficult, too opinionated, too much. The city taught me that wasn't true, but it took years. And coming back here, it's like stepping back into an old coat that doesn't fit anymore." "Why did you come back?" "My mother. She's not well, and I'm all she has." Clara paused. "But also because I wanted to see if I could stand up to this place now, if I could be who I am without apologizing for it." "And can you?" "I'm trying." The barn settled around them, the animals shifting in their stalls, the wind finding every crack and gap. Ethan felt something shift too, something fragile taking shape between them. It scared him and steadied him in equal measure. "They'll keep talking," he said. "Let them. It'll get worse before it gets better." Clara smiled, and there was steel in it. "Then we'd better get used to it." That night, after she had gone, Ethan lay in bed and thought about courage. He'd always associated it with big gestures, loud declarations, the kind of bravery that made stories. But maybe courage was quieter than that. Maybe it was choosing to show up day after day despite the whispers, despite the doubt. Maybe it was letting someone see you, really see you, and trusting they wouldn't turn away. He fell asleep thinking about Clara's smile, the way it didn't waver even when the weight of the town pressed down. Winter deepened. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. Ethan worked through it, the way he always did, but now there were moments of warmth punctuating the cold. Clara's visits became routine, expected, something he built his week around. She'd help with whatever needed doing, or sometimes they'd just sit and talk, her voice filling the silence he'd lived in for so long. The town noticed. How could they not? "She's at his place 3 times a week now," Mrs. Calloway said over her knitting circle, needles clicking like disapproval. "It's improper," another woman added. "A single woman spending that much time alone with a man. Especially that man." "What's wrong with Ethan Hale?" This from Mrs. Brennan, Tom's wife, who had a streak of fairness the others lacked. "Nothing's wrong with him exactly. He's just not much. Clara could do better." "Better how? He works hard, keeps to himself, doesn't cause trouble." "That's exactly it. He doesn't cause anything. He's too passive, too quiet. What kind of life could he give her?" Mrs. Brennan set her knitting down. "Maybe the kind of life she wants." The conversation moved on, but the doubt lingered, spreading like mold through the town's collective consciousness. By the time the first snow fell, Clara Vance and Ethan Hale had become Red Hollow's favorite topic of speculation. Clara felt it every time she went into town. The way conversation stopped when she entered a room, the pointed looks, the carefully neutral greetings that dripped with judgment. Her mother had stopped trying to talk her out of it, settling instead into tight-lipped disapproval. "You're making a mistake," she said one morning over breakfast. "You've mentioned." "I'm serious, Clara. That man can't give you the life you deserve."
"And what life do I deserve, Mother? One where I marry someone I don't care about just to satisfy the town's expectations?" Her mother's face pinched. "I want you to be happy." "Then let me be." But happiness, Clara was learning, wasn't something you got permission for. You had to take it, claim it, defend it, and she was prepared to do all three.
She rode out to Ethan's ranch that afternoon, needing to be somewhere that felt real. He was in the workshop, building something she couldn't identify, wood shavings curling at his feet. He looked up when she entered, and his whole face changed, opened, softened, became something other than guarded. "Hey," he said. "Hey yourself. What brings you out?" "Do I need a reason?" "No." He set down his tools, brushed off his hands. "But you've got one anyway." She did. She had a dozen. But standing there in the workshop, watching him watch her, she forgot most of them. What remained was simpler. She wanted to be here. With him. "The town's getting worse," she said. Ethan nodded. "I heard. Does it bother you?" "We've had this conversation. We're having it again." He sighed, leaned against the workbench. "What do you want me to say, Clara? That I don't care what they think? I'd be lying. That I'm going to march into town and tell them all off? That's not who I am." "Then who are you?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended, but she didn't take it back. She needed to know, needed to understand what she was fighting for. Ethan was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was low, careful. "I'm a man who knows his limits, who doesn't pretend to be something he's not. I'm not going to suddenly become the kind of person this town respects, Clara. I've made peace with that." "But have you made peace with being dismissed, with being treated like you don't matter?" "Some days." He looked at her directly. "And some days it eats at me. But either way, I wake up the next morning and do the work. Because that's all I know how to do." Clara felt something crack open in her chest. "That's not enough. It's all I have." "No." She crossed the space between them, took his hands in hers. They were rough, calloused, scarred from years of labor. Real hands. "It's not all you have. You have integrity. You have steadiness. You have kindness that doesn't need an audience. That's more than most men in this town can claim." Ethan looked down at their joined hands, his throat working. "You see things in me that aren't there. I see things in you that you've been taught to ignore." He pulled away gently, turned toward the window. Outside, snow was starting to fall, fat flakes drifting down lazy and inevitable. "What do you want from me, Clara?" The question hung between them, huge and unavoidable. What did she want? She'd been asking herself that for weeks, circling the answer without landing on it. But standing here, watching him struggle with a doubt that had been carved into him by years of casual cruelty, she knew. "I want you to stop apologizing for existing," she said. "I want you to see yourself the way I see you. And I want—" She hesitated, then pushed forward. "I want to build something with you. A life. A real one." Ethan turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. The town will never accept it. The town doesn't get a vote. Clara, do you want this?" She stepped closer. "Forget the town. Forget what people think. Do you want this?" He looked at her like she'd asked him to fly, like the possibility was so foreign, so impossible that he couldn't even process it. But beneath the disbelief, she saw something else. Hope. Fragile and half-hidden, but there. "Yes," he said finally, the word barely audible. "But wanting something doesn't make it right." "Why not?" "Because I can't give you what you deserve. I can't—" "Stop." Clara's voice was firm. "Stop telling me what I deserve. I'm a grown woman, Ethan. I've lived in cities, worked jobs, made my own decisions. I know what I want, and I'm standing here telling you that I want this. I want you." The workshop filled with silence, thick and charged. Outside, the snow fell harder, coating the world in white. Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. She could see him fighting with himself, decades of conditioning warring with the raw want she'd laid bare. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. If we do this, it won't be easy. I don't need easy. The town will make your life hell. They already are. I'm not the kind of man who makes grand gestures. I won't sweep you off your feet.
Clara smiled. I don't want to be swept. I want to stand beside someone. I want to build something that lasts. He crossed the space between them in 2 steps, cupped her face in his rough hands, and kissed her. It wasn't practiced or smooth. It was tentative and fierce and real, carrying all the words he didn't know how to say. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara rested her forehead against his. So we're doing this, she said. We're doing this. People are going to lose their minds. Let them. She laughed, and it felt like breaking free of something. When? Ethan pulled back, looked at her with an intensity she hadn't seen before. Spring. Give me the winter to prepare, to make the ranch ready. Then we'll do it properly. Properly how? I'll ask you to marry me, in front of everyone. And when you say yes, they'll have to accept it. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and hot. You're braver than you think. I'm terrified. Good. So am I. They stood there in the workshop, snow falling outside, the future uncertain and frightening and absolutely necessary. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan felt like he was moving toward something instead of just enduring. Word spread fast. By the end of the week, everyone in Red Hollow knew that Clara Vance and Ethan Hale were planning to marry. The reaction was exactly what they'd expected. She's lost her mind, people said. He's taking advantage of her. It'll end badly, mark my words. At the general store, Tom Brennan listened to the gossip with growing irritation. Finally, he'd had enough. Maybe, he said loudly enough to cut through the chatter, we should let people live their own lives without running a commentary. Porter, who'd been holding forth about Ethan's inadequacies, turned. You defending him, Tom? I'm saying he's done nothing to deserve the way this town treats him. He works hard, pays his debts, minds his business. What more do you want? We want men who can stand up, who can lead, who can what? Drink themselves stupid and start fights? Because we've got plenty of those, and I don't see anyone lining up to sing their praises. The room went quiet. Tom rarely raised his voice, and when he did, people listened. Ethan Hale is a decent man, Tom continued, and Clara Vance is a smart woman. If they've chosen each other, that's their business, not ours. He turned back to his work, effectively ending the conversation, but the silence that followed was thick with resentment. Clara's mother tried one last time to change her daughter's mind. You're throwing your life away, she said, voice breaking. You could have anyone. I don't want anyone, I want him. Why? What does he have that other men don't? Clara thought about it, searching for words that would make her mother understand. He sees me. Not the version of me he wishes I was, not the one the town expects. Just me. And he doesn't ask me to be different. That's not enough to build a life on. It's exactly enough. Her mother looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. You've always been stubborn. I learned from the best. A faint smile crossed her mother's face, there and gone. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise. And promise me you won't let him break your heart. Clara took her mother's hands. He won't. But even if he did, it would be my heart to break. Winter pressed on, and Ethan worked with a purpose he'd never felt before. He repaired the house, fixing boards and sealing cracks, making it warm and sound. He built new furniture, a proper table, chairs that didn't wobble, a bed frame that would last. He cleaned and organized, transforming the bachelor's quarters into something that could be a home. Clara helped when she could, but mostly she planned. A wedding in Red Hollow was a public affair, and she wasn't about to hide or apologize. If they were going to do this, they'd do it right. She talked to the pastor, a thin man with kind eyes who listened without judgment. You're sure about this? He asked. Completely. People will talk. They already are. He smiled. Then I suppose there's nothing left to lose. They set the date for early April, after the worst of the winter had passed, but before the spring work began in earnest. Clara sent word to the few friends she still had in Denver, knowing most wouldn't come but wanting them to know anyway. The announcement was posted outside the church, and Red Hollow buzzed with it for weeks. The majority remained skeptical, but a few voices of support emerged.
Tom Brennan and his wife, the pastor, a handful of others who were tired of the town's narrow thinking. It wasn't much, but it was something. One evening, as they sat on Ethan's porch watching the sunset paint the snow orange and pink, Clara leaned against him. "Having second thoughts?" she asked. "Every day," she laughed. "Me too. But you're still here." "So are you." Ethan slipped his arm around her shoulders. "I keep waiting to wake up and find out this was a dream. If it is, we're both having it." They sat in silence, watching the light fade. Somewhere in town, people were probably still talking about them, still predicting their failure. But out here, on this porch, with the land stretching wide and quiet, none of that mattered. "You know what I realized?" Ethan said. "What?" "I spent so long trying to prove myself to people who'd already made up their minds, and it never worked. I was never going to be enough for them." He paused. "But maybe I don't need to be. Maybe being enough for you is all that matters." Clara turned to look at him, her eyes bright. "You've always been enough for me." "I'm starting to believe that." "Good. Because it's true." The weeks passed, winter giving way slowly to spring. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and mud, the kind of mess that made everything harder. But beneath it there were signs of life. Green shoots pushing through, birds returning, the world preparing to renew itself. Ethan prepared too. He practiced what he would say, the words he'd speak in front of the town. He wasn't good with speeches, never had been, but this mattered too much to fumble. Clara deserved better than his usual silence. She caught him practicing one afternoon, mumbling to himself in the barn. "What are you doing?" she asked, amused. He flushed. "Nothing." Didn't sound like nothing. "I was just trying to figure out what to say." At the wedding, Clara's expression softened. "You don't have to say much, just 'I do' works fine. I want to say more. I want people to understand." "Ethan," she crossed to him, took his hands. "You don't owe them an explanation. This is for us, not them. But I want them to know. I want them to see that you're not making a mistake, that I'm not—" "Stop." Her voice was gentle but firm. "You're not on trial. This isn't about proving anything to anyone except each other." He nodded, but the tension didn't leave his shoulders. Clara could see the weight he was carrying, the accumulated doubt of a lifetime, pressing down. "What are you afraid of?" she asked quietly. "That they're right, that I'll let you down, that I'm not capable of being the husband you need. And what do I need?" "Someone strong, someone certain." Clara smiled sadly. "I need someone honest, someone who shows up, someone who sees me as a partner, not a prize. You're all of those things, Ethan. The rest is just noise." He wanted to believe her. He could see it in his face, the struggle between ingrained doubt and fragile hope. Clara waited, giving him space to find his way to it. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay. Okay? I'll stop trying to prove something I can't prove. I'll just show up, be who I am. That's all I'm asking." They stood together in the barn, the smell of hay and leather around them, and Ethan felt something settle. It wasn't confidence, not exactly, but it was acceptance. Of himself, of what he could offer, of the fact that maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The day before the wedding, Clara's mother came to see her. She looked older than Clara remembered, worn down by years of worry and work. "I brought you something," she said, holding out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple gold, slightly tarnished, with a small stone that caught the light. "It was my mother's," she said, "and her mother's before that. I wore it when I married your father." Clara's throat tightened. "Mother, I still think you're making a mistake, but you're my daughter, and I love you. And if this is what you've chosen, then I want you to have this." Clara took the box, tears spilling over. "Thank you." Her mother pulled her into a hug, rare and fierce. "Be happy," she whispered. "That's all I've ever wanted for you." "I will be." When her mother left, Clara sat alone with the ring, turning it over in her fingers. 3 generations of women had worn this, had made their own choices, built their own lives. Now it was her turn. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, mind racing through everything that could go wrong. The town could refuse to attend, they could disrupt the ceremony. Ethan could change his mind, realize he'd been swept up in something he didn't truly want. But beneath the fear was something steadier, a certainty that surprised her with its strength. This was right. Whatever came after, whatever the town thought or said or did, this was right. She got up, wrapped herself in a shawl, and stood at the window. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably awake too, fighting his own doubts. She wished she could go to him, but tradition and propriety said she had to wait until tomorrow. So she waited, watching the stars wheel overhead, counting down the hours until she could stand beside him and choose him in front of everyone who'd said she shouldn't. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Clara dressed carefully, the ring on her finger, her mother's hands helping with buttons and pins. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different, but because she looked certain. At the church, Ethan waited, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He'd barely slept, had spent the night going over everything that could go wrong. But when the door opened and Clara stepped through, all of that fell away. She was beautiful. Not in the delicate, fragile way the town valued, but in a way that was wholly her own, strong and real and absolutely sure. Their eyes met across the church, and Ethan felt the fear recede. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. The church was half full, which was more than Ethan had expected and less than Clara had hoped for. People sat in clusters, their presence more curiosity than celebration, faces carefully neutral as they watched the proceedings with the detached interest of spectators at a horse race they'd bet against. Ethan stood at the front, his suit borrowed from Tom Brennan and slightly too large in the shoulders. His hands were clammy, and he resisted the urge to wipe them on his pants. The pastor stood beside him, expression kind but unreadable, waiting. When Clara appeared at the back of the church, a ripple went through the assembled crowd. She walked alone. Her mother had offered, but Clara had declined, wanting to make the choice visibly her own. Her dress was simple, cream-colored, nothing fancy. But the way she carried herself, the set of her shoulders and the directness of her gaze, made her look like royalty walking through a room of peasants. Ethan's breath caught. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she was walking toward him, choosing him, in front of everyone who'd said she shouldn't. She reached him and took his hands. They were shaking, both of theirs. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey." The pastor cleared his throat, opened his book, and began. The words washed over Ethan like water, familiar and distant. He'd heard them at other weddings, never imagining he'd be the one standing here. The vows felt enormous, weighted with meaning he wasn't sure he could carry. When it came time to speak, his voice cracked on the first word. He cleared his throat, tried again. "I do." Clara's turn, her voice was steady, clear. "I do." The pastor smiled. "Then, by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." There should have been cheers, applause, something. Instead, there was polite silence, a few awkward coughs. Clara didn't seem to notice. She leaned in and kissed Ethan, quick and firm, sealing it. They turned to face the congregation, and Ethan felt the weight of every eye on him. Judging, measuring, waiting for the inevitable failure. Clara squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back. They walked down the aisle together, past faces that ranged from skeptical to hostile to, in a few cases, genuinely happy. Tom Brennan nodded. The pastor's wife smiled. Clara's mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, her expression complicated. Outside, the spring air was cool and fresh. A few people had gathered to offer congratulations, genuine ones, from the handful who'd supported them. Tom shook Ethan's hand hard. "You did good," he said. "Haven't done anything yet. You showed up. That's more than most." Clara's mother approached, hesitant. She looked at Ethan for a long moment, then nodded. "Take care of her," she said. "I will." "I mean it. She's all I have." "I know." Ethan met her eyes. "I'll do my best." It wasn't a blessing, not quite, but it wasn't condemnation either. Clara hugged her mother, whispering something Ethan couldn't hear, and then they were climbing into the wagon for the ride back to the ranch. The reality of it hit him as they left town. They were married. Clara was his wife. He was her husband. The words felt foreign, like clothes that didn't quite fit. "You're quiet," Clara said. "Thinking." "About?" "Everything." He glanced at her. "You all right?" I'm perfect. Liar? She laughed. Okay, I'm terrified, but also happy. Is that normal? I don't know. I've never done this before. Neither have I. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking, the mare plodding steady. The ranch came into view, small and weathered against the wide sky. Ethan had never seen it as inadequate before, but now, looking at it through Clara's eyes, he saw every flaw. The sagging porch rail, the patched roof, the barn that listed slightly to one side. I know it's not much, he started. Stop. Clara's voice was firm. Don't apologize for what you've built. It's honest work, and it's ours now. Ours, he repeated, testing the word. Yes, ours. They pulled up to the house, and Ethan helped Clara down. She stood looking at it, hands on her hips, and he braced for disappointment. Instead, she smiled. It needs a garden, she said, and the porch could use some chairs, maybe some flowers in window boxes. You want to plant flowers? Why not? Just because it's a working ranch doesn't mean it can't be beautiful. Ethan had never thought about beauty in relation to the ranch. Function, yes. Survival. But beauty seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. We can try, he said. They went inside, and Clara walked through the room slowly, taking inventory. Ethan watched her, trying to see it through her eyes. The sparse furniture, the bare walls, the general masculinity of the space. It looked exactly like what it was, a place where a man had lived alone for years. We'll make it work, Clara said, more to herself than to him. I can build more furniture, shelves maybe, whatever you need. She turned to him, and something in her expression shifted. Ethan. Yeah? We're alone. It took him a moment to understand what she meant. Then it hit him. They were married, alone, and the next part was expected. His throat went dry. Right. Are you nervous? Terrified. Clara crossed to him, took his hands. Me too. You don't seem it. I'm good at hiding things. She paused. We don't have to. There's no rush. We can just talk. Get used to being married first. Ethan felt relief and disappointment in equal measure. That might be good. They sat together on the threadbare couch, awkward in a way they hadn't been before. The weight of expectation, their own and the town's, pressed down, making everything feel stilted and strange. This is weird, Clara said finally. Very. We were fine yesterday. Yesterday we weren't married. And now we are. And suddenly, I don't know how to sit next to you. Ethan laughed, surprised. I thought it was just me. Definitely not just you. Clara kicked off her shoes, tucked her feet under her. Maybe we should just be normal. Pretend it's any other day. Any other day you wouldn't be here at night. True? She considered. Then we make a new normal. They talked until the light faded, about small things and big things and everything in between. Eventually, the awkwardness eased, replaced by the familiarity they'd built over months. When they finally went to bed, the bed Ethan had built with his own hands, sanded smooth and sturdy, they lay side by side in the dark, not touching, but aware of each other. Ethan? Clara's voice was soft. Yeah? Thank you. For what? For not being someone else. He turned toward her, could just make out her profile in the dim light from the window. I don't know how to be anyone else. Good. Don't learn. He reached out, found her hand, laced their fingers together. It was a small gesture, but it felt enormous. They fell asleep like that, connected by touch, the future uncertain but faced together. Morning came with roosters and cold air. Ethan woke first, disoriented by the presence of another person in his bed. Clara was still asleep, her hair loose on the pillow, face soft in a way it never was when she was awake. He studied her, this woman who'd chosen him, and felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. He slipped out of bed quietly, dressed, went outside to start the day's work. The animals needed feeding, the fences needed checking, life needed maintaining. Marriage didn't change that. If anything, it made it more urgent. He was providing for two now, and the ranch had always been barely adequate for one. When Clara emerged an hour later, she found him mucking out stalls, already sweating despite the cool morning. You started without me, she said. Didn't want to wake you. I'm awake now. She grabbed a pitchfork. Put me to work." They worked side by side, falling into the rhythm they'd established over winter. But something was different now, a subtle shift in the dynamic. They were partners in a way they hadn't been before, bound by law and choice, and the promise they'd made in front of everyone. The first test came 3 days later. Ethan had gone into town for supplies, leaving Clara at the ranch. He was loading flour sacks into the wagon when Porter approached, expression smug. "Well, well, the married man." Ethan didn't respond, just kept loading. "How's married life treating you, Hale? She figured out her mistake yet?" "Leave it alone, Porter. Just making conversation. No need to get touchy." Porter leaned against the wagon. "Must be strange having a woman like that settle for someone like you." Ethan's hands stilled. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just that she could have had her pick. City girl, smart, not hard to look at. And she chose you." He said it like the punchline to a joke. For years, Ethan had absorbed comments like this, let them roll off, refused to engage. But something was different now. Clara wasn't just choosing him in theory, she'd married him, bound her life to his. And listening to Porter diminish that choice, diminish her judgment, sparked something hot and unfamiliar in his chest. "You know what I think?" Ethan said, his voice low. "What's that?" "I think you're so focused on tearing other people down because you've got nothing to build up. Clara chose me because she saw something worth choosing, and the fact that you can't see it says more about you than it does about me." Porter's smile faltered. "Watch yourself, Hale." "No. You watch yourself. She's my wife now, and I won't stand here and let you disrespect her or the choice she made." He climbed onto the wagon, took up the reins. Porter stepped back, looking genuinely surprised. As Ethan drove away, he could feel his heart pounding, adrenaline making his hands shake. He'd stood up, actually stood up, and it felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. When he got home and told Clara what happened, she looked at him with something close to pride. "You defended me. Defended us." Same thing. She kissed him, quick and fierce. "Thank you. I should have done it years ago." "You did it when it mattered. That's what counts." But the encounter stuck with Ethan, churning in his mind as the days passed. He'd spent so long avoiding confrontation, taking the path of least resistance, that standing up felt almost wrong, like he'd violated some fundamental rule of who he was. Clara noticed his brooding. "Talk to me." They were sitting on the porch. She'd been right about needing chairs, watching the sun set over the pasture. "I keep thinking about what I said to Porter. Having regrets?" "I don't know. Maybe. I'm not that guy, Clara. The one who stands up and makes speeches." "Why not?" "Because I never have been." "So, people change." Ethan shook his head. "But do they? Or do they just pretend for a while before going back to what they were?" Clara was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I think people can change if they have a reason to. And I think sometimes the person we've been isn't the person we're meant to be. It's just the person circumstances made us. And you think circumstances have changed? Haven't they? You're married now. You have someone depending on you, believing in you. That's different than being alone." He knew she was right, but it scared him. Being alone was safe. You could only disappoint yourself. But now, with Clara's faith in him, the stakes were higher. What if he couldn't be the man she needed? What if he reverted back to silence and acceptance, disappointing her the way he'd disappointed the town? "What if I let you down?" he asked quietly. Clara took his hand. "Then we'll figure it out, together. That's what marriage is, Ethan. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up even when it's hard. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's worth doing." The next morning, Ethan made a decision. If he was going to be Clara's husband, really be her husband, not just in name, he needed to stop waiting for permission to exist. He needed to stop apologizing for taking up space. He started small. When they went into town together the following week, he didn't look at the ground. He met people's eyes, nodded greetings, refused to shrink. It felt unnatural, like wearing someone else's skin, but he did it anyway. At the Mercantile, Mrs. Calloway made a pointed comment about how quickly Clara was learning to make do with limited means. Before, Ethan would have ignored it. Now, he spoke up. "Clara's not making do," he said evenly. "She's building something. There's a difference." Mrs. Calloway blinked, taken aback. "I didn't mean—" "I think you did. But it doesn't matter what you meant. What matters is what's true. And the truth is, we're doing fine. He could feel Clara's eyes on him, could sense her surprise and approval. It gave him courage. They left the store together, and Clara was grinning. You're getting good at this. At what? At not taking people's nonsense. I don't know if I'm good at it, but I'm trying. That's all anyone can ask. But trying came with consequences. The more Ethan spoke up, the more he refused to accept the town's dismissal, the more some people pushed back. Porter started spreading rumors that the ranch was failing, that Ethan couldn't provide, that Clara was already regretting her choice. None of it was true, but truth mattered less than narrative in a place like Red Hollow. One afternoon, a man named Garrett showed up at the ranch. He was older, weathered, with the hard look of someone who'd spent his life fighting. He owned one of the larger spreads to the south and had always treated Ethan with contempt. Heard you're expanding your herd, Garrett said, not bothering with pleasantries. Thinking about it. That's a problem. Ethan straightened. How so? Your north fence borders my south pasture. Cattle get through, I'll hold you responsible. The fence is solid. For now. But cattle are unpredictable. Just wanted to make sure we understand each other. It wasn't about the fence, and they both knew it. It was about putting Ethan in his place, reminding him that men like Garrett had power and men like Ethan didn't. I understand you fine, Ethan said, and I'll make sure the fence stays solid. Anything else? Garrett studied him, surprised by the firmness. Just watch yourself, Hale. This isn't the kind of country that forgives mistakes. After he left, Clara came out from the barn where she'd been listening. He was trying to intimidate you. I know. Are you going to let him? Ethan looked at her, then back at the fence line in question. It was solid. He'd rebuilt it himself last fall. But Garrett was right about one thing. This wasn't forgiving country. One mistake, one moment of weakness, and everything could collapse. No, he said finally. I'm not going to let him. Good. Over the following weeks, Ethan threw himself into the work with renewed focus. He reinforced every fence, checked every post, made sure there was no room for error. Clara worked beside him, learning as she went, asking questions and offering observations that were often sharper than his own. They developed a rhythm, a partnership that felt natural despite its newness. In the evenings, they'd sit together planning improvements, where to plant the garden, how to expand the barn, what livestock to invest in. It was the future tense, spoken aloud, made real by their shared belief in it. But the town's skepticism didn't fade. If anything, it intensified. People watched them like spectators at a slow-motion accident, waiting for the inevitable crash. The breaking point came in late spring, during a town meeting about water rights. The creek that fed several ranches, including Ethan's, had been running low, and there was talk of rationing. Ethan almost didn't go. He'd never had much voice in town decisions. But Clara insisted. You have as much right to be there as anyone, she said. More, actually, since it affects our land. They walked into the meeting hall together, and conversation died. Eyes tracked them to their seats, judgment thick in the air. Ethan forced himself to sit straight, to not hunch his shoulders the way he wanted to. Garrett ran the meeting, standing at the front with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. He laid out the problem: drought conditions, low water levels, the need for restrictions. We'll divide usage based on herd size, he said. Bigger operations get more water. Smaller ones scale down. That's not fair, someone objected. Some of us are just starting out. Life's not fair. The big spreads support this town's economy. They get priority. Ethan felt anger kindle in his chest. It was the same logic that had always governed Red Hollow. Those with power got more. Those without got less. And questioning it was seen as weakness. He stood up before he could talk himself out of it. That's not how water rights work, he said. The room went silent. Garrett turned, eyebrows raised. You got something to say, Hale? Yeah. Water rights are tied to the land, not herd size. Everyone with property along the creek has equal claim. That might be how the law reads, but practically you're trying to squeeze out the smaller ranchers so you can expand. Don't dress it up like you're doing the town a favor. You could have heard a pin drop. Ethan's heart was hammering, but he kept his voice steady. Garrett's face darkened. You calling me a liar? I'm saying your plan benefits you and hurts everyone else. That's not leadership. That's self-interest. And what would you suggest, seeing as you're suddenly an expert? Ethan hadn't thought that far ahead. He'd reacted on instinct, defending what was right, but he didn't have a solution. He floundered for a moment, feeling the room's attention like a physical weight. Clara stood beside him. "Rotate the schedule," she said clearly. "Each ranch gets a set amount of time based on acreage, not herd size. That way everyone gets fair access," Garrett scoffed. "And who's going to enforce that? Who's going to make sure people don't cheat?" "We all do," Clara said. "We hold each other accountable. It's called community." A few people nodded. Tom Brennan spoke up. "That sounds reasonable." "It sounds like chaos," Garrett shot back. "It sounds fair," someone else said. The meeting devolved into argument, people taking sides. But the conversation had shifted. Garrett's plan wasn't the foregone conclusion it had been when they walked in. Eventually, they agreed to table the decision and bring it to a vote the following week. As people filed out, Ethan felt hands on his shoulder, Tom offering support. A few others nodded at him, approval grudging but present. Outside, Clara was shaking. "I can't believe we just did that. You did most of it. We did it together." She grabbed his hand. "Did you see Garrett's face?" "I saw it." Ethan's hands were trembling too, adrenaline still flooding his system. "I thought he was going to hit me." "He wouldn't dare. Not in front of everyone." "Maybe." Ethan looked back at the hall. "I've never done anything like that. How does it feel?" He thought about it. Terrifying, but also right. They walked back to the wagon in silence, both processing what had happened. The ride home was quiet, but it was the good kind of quiet, the kind that came after something significant. That night, lying in bed, Clara spoke into the darkness. "You're changing." "I know." "Does it scare you?" "Yes." "Me too." She rolled toward him. "But I like who you're becoming." "What if I can't sustain it? What if I go back to being—" "You won't, because you're not changing into someone else. You're just becoming more yourself." Ethan wanted to believe that. He wanted to think that the man who'd stood up in that meeting was the real him, buried under years of conditioning. But he couldn't shake the fear that he was performing, that any day now the performance would crack and he'd revert to the quiet, dismissed man he'd always been. "I don't want to disappoint you," he said. Clara propped herself up on one elbow. "Listen to me. You could never disappoint me by being who you are. The only way you'd disappoint me is if you stopped trying, if you gave up. But I don't think you will." "Why not?" "Because you're stubborn. You just hide it well." He laughed despite himself. "Stubborn?" "Absolutely. You've spent years quietly refusing to become what this town wanted you to be. That takes stubbornness." It was a perspective he'd never considered. He'd always thought of himself as passive, accepting. But maybe there was defiance in that refusal to perform, even if it was quiet defiance. "Maybe," he conceded. "Definitely." Clara lay back down, nestling against him. "Now stop overthinking and get some sleep. We've got fences to check tomorrow." He held her, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing, and let himself believe, just for tonight, that maybe he was enough after all. The vote came the following Tuesday, and half the town showed up. The hall was packed tighter than Sunday services, people standing along the walls when the chairs ran out. Ethan and Clara arrived early, taking seats near the middle, close enough to be visible, but not so far forward as to seem presumptuous. Garrett stood at the front again, his expression darker than it had been at the first meeting. He'd spent the week campaigning, visiting the larger ranches, shoring up support. Ethan had heard about it secondhand, how Garrett was framing the issue as a matter of protecting the town's economy, painting anyone who opposed him as short-sighted or worse. "Let's get this done," Garrett said when the room finally settled. "We all know why we're here. The creek's running low, and we need a system. I've proposed one that makes sense. Bigger operations get more water because they contribute more to Red Hollow's prosperity." "We already discussed this," Tom Brennan said. "Clara Vance suggested rotation based on acreage. That seems fair." "Fair to who? The people barely scraping by?" Garrett's voice carried an edge. "Look, I respect that everyone wants their share. But we can't run a community on sentiment. We need practical solutions." "Practical for you," someone muttered. Garrett ignored it. "I'm calling for a vote. Those in favor of allocation based on herd size, raise your hands." About a third of the room raised hands.
mostly people who worked for the big ranches or depended on them indirectly. Garrett counted, nodded, and those in favor of the rotation system? More hands went up this time. Not a majority, but close. Ethan raised his hand, feeling the weight of eyes on him. Clara's hand went up beside his, steady and certain. Garrett counted again, slower this time. When he finished, his jaw was tight. Looks like we're split. We'll need to discuss further. No, we don't. This from an older man named Hutchins who ran a mid-sized spread. By my count, rotation won by 3 votes. I counted differently. Then count again. The tension ratcheted up, people shifting in their seats. Garrett looked like he wanted to argue, but too many eyes were on him now, watching to see if he'd honor the vote or try to manipulate it. Fine, he said finally. Rotation it is. But when this fails, don't say I didn't warn you. He sat down hard, and the meeting moved on to other business. But everyone knew what had just happened. The big ranchers had lost, and Ethan Hale, quiet, dismissed Ethan Hale, had been part of making it happen. After the meeting, several people approached them. Some were congratulatory, others curious, a few outright hostile. Porter shouldered past without a word, his expression venomous. Garrett left without speaking to anyone, his exit pointed and deliberate. But Tom Brennan clapped Ethan on the shoulder. Good work in there. I barely said anything. You said enough. Sometimes that's all it takes. Walking back to the wagon, Clara was practically vibrating with energy. Did you see his face? Garrett looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. He's not going to forget this. Good. Let him stew. She climbed up beside Ethan. You stood up for what was right. That matters. It might also make things harder. Things were already hard. At least now we're not lying down and taking it. Ethan guided the mare onto the road, the evening light stretching long shadows across the dust. He knew Clara was right. Standing up was necessary, important even. But it also felt like stepping out from behind cover in the middle of a firefight. You might survive, but you'd definitely become a target. The next few weeks proved him right. Garrett's resentment manifested in small, petty ways. He complained loudly at the general store about how newcomers were disrupting established systems. He made a point of checking his fence line obsessively, looking for any excuse to blame Ethan if cattle strayed. He encouraged his ranch hands to make comments whenever Ethan came to town. It wasn't open warfare, but it was constant pressure, designed to wear them down. Clara handled it better than Ethan did. She'd lived in Denver, dealt with worse than small-town politics, and had developed a thick skin. But for Ethan, each snide comment felt like a confirmation of what he'd always believed, that he didn't belong, that standing up had been a mistake, that he should have just kept his head down. One evening, after a particularly bad day in town where Porter had loudly questioned whether Ethan could even afford to keep a wife, he came home silent and withdrawn. Clara noticed immediately. What happened? Nothing. Ethan? He unsaddled the mare, his movements jerky and frustrated. Just the usual. People talking, making their opinions known. About us? About me. About how I'm not enough. How you made a mistake. How it's only a matter of time before you realize it. Clara was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was controlled. And do you believe them? I don't want to. That's not what I asked. Ethan turned to face her. Some days, yeah. Some days I think they're right. That I'm playing at being something I'm not. And eventually the truth will come out. What truth? That I'm exactly what they always said. Too quiet, too weak, not enough. Clara crossed the space between them, grabbed his face in both hands. Listen to me. Those people don't get to define you. I don't even get to define you. Only you get to do that. And you need to decide, are you going to let their voices be louder than your own? It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You choose what you believe about yourself. Every day you choose. Ethan pulled away, frustrated. You make it sound easy, like I can just decide to ignore decades of being told I'm not good enough. I'm not saying ignore it. I'm saying fight it. Consciously, deliberately, fight it. Her voice softened. I know it's hard. I know it feels impossible some days. But Ethan, you're not the same man you were 6 months ago. You've changed. I've watched it happen. What if I can't sustain it? Then you stumble and get back up. That's what people do. He wanted to believe her, wanted to think that change was possible, that he could become someone different than what the town had decided he was. But the doubt ran deep,
carved into him by years of casual dismissal. That night, he barely slept. He lay staring at the ceiling, listening to Clara breathe beside him, and thought about all the ways he might fail. The ranch could collapse. The water situation could worsen. Garrett could find a way to squeeze them out. Clara could wake up one day and realize she'd settled. The thoughts spiraled, each one feeding the next, until he was drowning in them. He must have finally dozed off because he woke to Clara shaking him gently. "You were dreaming," she said, "talking in your sleep." "What was I saying?" "I'm sorry," over and over. Her face was sad in the pre-dawn light. "Ethan, you have nothing to apologize for." "Feels like I do." She sat up, pulled her knees to her chest. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." When I first came back to Red Hollow, I was terrified. Not of the town, but of becoming who I used to be. Small, scared, willing to shrink myself to fit in. The city taught me I could be bigger than that, but I was afraid I'd forget the minute I crossed the town line. You didn't. Not yet. But it's a daily fight. Every time someone makes a comment about how I should act or what I should want, I have to consciously reject it. It doesn't get easier. You just get stronger. Ethan considered this. How? By deciding that their opinion matters less than your own. By building a life you actually want instead of the one they expect you to have. "And if I don't know what I want?" Clara smiled. "Then you start figuring it out. What do you want, Ethan? Not what you think you should want. Not what would make the town respect you. What do you actually want?" No one had ever asked him that. His whole life had been about survival, about getting through, about not making waves. Want had seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. "I want this," he said slowly. "The ranch, you, a life that's ours. I want to stop feeling like I'm apologizing for existing." "Then stop." "Just like that?" "Just like that. It won't be perfect. You'll backslide sometimes. But you start by making the decision, and then you practice it every day." The sun was rising now, light creeping through the window. Ethan looked at Clara, this woman who'd chosen him despite everything, and felt something shift. Not dramatically, not like in the stories, just a small, quiet adjustment in how he saw himself. "Okay," he said. "Okay? I'll try. I can't promise I'll get it right, but I'll try." Clara kissed him, soft and slow. "That's all I'm asking." The days that followed were an exercise in conscious choice. Every time Ethan felt himself shrinking, making himself smaller, he forced himself to stand straight. Every time he wanted to apologize for taking up space, he bit his tongue. Every time someone made a dismissive comment, he met their eyes instead of looking away. It was exhausting, but it was also revelatory. He started to notice things he'd missed before. How much of his behavior had been reactive, shaped by other people's expectations. How often he'd apologized when he'd done nothing wrong. How much energy he'd spent trying to be invisible. Clara worked alongside him, both in the physical labor of the ranch and in this more difficult internal work. She'd point out when he was shrinking himself, gently but firmly calling his attention to it. "You just apologized for the coffee being too strong," she said one morning. "It is too strong." "So? I can add water if I want. You don't need to apologize for how you make coffee in your own house." He laughed, caught. "Fair point. It's always the small things. The little apologies, the tiny self-diminishments. They add up." She was right. And once he started paying attention, he couldn't stop noticing. The ranch work helped too. There was something about physical labor, about seeing tangible results from effort, that built confidence. They expanded the garden, Clara planting vegetables and herbs with a precision that surprised him. They repaired the barn's lean, bracing it properly so it stood true. They built a proper chicken coop with nesting boxes and a run that kept the birds safe from predators. Each improvement felt like a statement. We're here, we're staying, we're building something that matters. Word got around. People started noticing the changes, and opinions began, slowly, grudgingly, to shift. Not everyone's. Garrett remained hostile, Porter openly contemptuous, but others, particularly those who'd voted for the rotation system, started treating Ethan with something approaching respect. Tom Brennan mentioned one day that his nephew was starting a ranch of his own and had asked about Ethan's methods for fence building. "Told him you do solid work," Tom said. "Hope that's all right." Ethan was stunned. "You recommended me?" Why wouldn't I? You know what you're doing. It was such a simple statement, but it hit Ethan hard. Someone thought he knew what he was doing. Someone trusted his expertise enough to recommend him. Thank you, he managed. Don't thank me. Just help the kid out if he asks. When Ethan told Clara about it that evening, she just smiled. See, people are starting to notice. Some people. That's how it starts. A few people, then a few more. You're proving them wrong just by existing, by doing good work, by being a decent person. It doesn't feel like enough. It's exactly enough. But the real test came in late summer, when one of Garrett's hands got injured. The man, a young guy named Sam, had been thrown from a horse and broke his leg badly. The doctor said it, but he'd be laid up for months, unable to work, and Garrett made it clear he wouldn't be kept on if he couldn't earn his keep. Sam had a wife and a baby daughter. The situation was desperate. Clara heard about it at the general store and came home furious. He's going to throw them out. That man breaks his body working Garrett's ranch, and now that he's hurt, Garrett's just discarding him. That's how it works for most ranch hands. No work, no wages. It's cruel. It's practical. Garrett runs a business. Clara turned on him, eyes blazing. Don't defend him. I'm not defending him. I'm just saying that's how things are done. Well, maybe how things are done needs to change. She paced the kitchen, agitated. There has to be something we can do. Like what? I don't know. Help them somehow. Ethan was quiet, thinking. They didn't have much themselves. The ranch was profitable enough to keep them fed and housed, but there was no excess. Taking on another mouth to feed, let alone 3, would strain resources they didn't have. But he thought about Sam, about being young and hurt and disposable. He thought about how easily that could have been him, how many times he'd been one bad day away from losing everything. We could hire him, Ethan said slowly. Clara stopped pacing. What? To help around here. Light work, stuff he could do even with a bad leg. Mending tack, organizing the barn, tasks that need doing, but I never get to. We can't afford to pay him what Garrett did. No, but we could offer room and board for him and his family, a place to stay while he heals. It's not much, but it's something. Clara crossed to him, grabbed his hands. Are you serious? I think so, yeah. The more he thought about it, the more right it felt. We've got the barn loft. It's empty, but we could fix it up, make it livable. Ethan, that's incredibly generous. It's practical. I could use the help, and they need somewhere to be. It works for both of us. But it was more than practical, and they both knew it. It was a statement, a refusal to accept Garrett's brand of callousness as inevitable. They rode out to see Sam the next day. He and his wife, Marie, were staying in a run-down boarding house, the room cramped and depressing. The baby cried constantly, thin wails that spoke of hunger and discomfort. When Ethan laid out the offer, Sam looked stunned. You do that? For us? If you're willing to work for it, yes. But I can barely walk, Mr. Hale. I don't know how much use I'd be. Call me Ethan, and I'm not asking you to run cattle. Just help where you can. When you heal, we'll figure out something more. Marie started crying, clutching the baby. Thank you. We didn't know what we were going to do. You don't need to thank us. Just say yes. They moved in 3 days later. The loft wasn't fancy. Ethan and Clara had worked around the clock to make it habitable, patching holes and building basic furniture. But it was clean and dry and theirs. Marie cried again when she saw it, and Sam gripped Ethan's hand so hard it hurt. I won't forget this, Sam said. I swear, I'll work hard. I'll earn this. I know you will. The arrangement changed the ranch's dynamic. Sam turned out to be good with leatherwork, and he spent hours repairing tack that Ethan had been meaning to fix for months. Marie helped Clara with the garden and the cooking, grateful to have something to contribute. The baby, once fed regularly, stopped crying so much and became a cheerful presence. It felt like family, or at least something close to it. Ethan had lived alone for so long that he'd forgotten what it was like to have people around, to share space and meals and conversation. It was chaotic sometimes, louder than he was used to, but it was also good. The town noticed, of course. Everything got noticed in Red Hollow. Heard you took in Garrett's cast-off, Porter said one day at the livery, his tone mocking. I hired someone who needed work. Hired implies you can afford to pay him. That's between me and Sam, Porter laughed. You're building yourself a charity case ranch, Hale. That's not how you run a business. I'm running it the way I see fit. Yeah? Well, don't come crying when it collapses under you. But it didn't collapse. If anything, the extra hands, even Sam's limited contributions, made things easier. They got more done, and the load felt lighter distributed among multiple people. Garrett, predictably, was furious. He made pointed comments about people who interfered with other ranchers' business, who poached workers and set bad precedents. But he couldn't actually do anything about it. Sam had been let go, fair and square. Where he went after was his own business. The confrontation came in early fall. Ethan was in town picking up supplies when Garrett cornered him outside the mercantile. We need to talk. I'm listening. You made me look bad taking in Sam like that. That wasn't my intention, wasn't it? You swoop in, play the hero, make me out to be the villain. That was calculated. Ethan set down the sack of grain he'd been loading. Sam needed help. I was able to provide it. That's all there is to it. That's all? Garrett stepped closer, his bulk intimidating. You've been a thorn in my side since you married that woman. Standing up at meetings, questioning my decisions, now this. You're trying to undermine me. I'm trying to live my life. Your life is affecting mine. Then maybe you should examine why that bothers you so much. Garrett's face flushed dark. Watch yourself, Hale. I've been patient, but my patience has limits. Is that a threat? It's a fact. They stood there, tension crackling between them. Ethan's heart was pounding, but he didn't back down. A year ago, he would have. He would have apologized, deferred, found a way to smooth things over. But Clara's voice echoed in his head. You choose what you believe about yourself. I'm not trying to undermine you, Garrett, but I'm also not going to stand by and let people suffer when I can help. If that bothers you, that's your problem, not mine. He turned and finished loading the wagon, hands shaking, but voice steady. Garrett watched for a moment, then stalked off without another word. When Ethan got home and told Clara what happened, she looked worried. He's escalating. I know. That could be dangerous. What do you want me to do? Back down? Apologize for helping Sam? No, but I want you to be careful. Men like Garrett don't like being challenged. I didn't challenge him. I just refused to be bullied. Clara nodded slowly. You're right, but that doesn't mean he won't retaliate. She was right to worry. A week later, 3 of Ethan's cattle turned up missing. He found the gap in the fence, wire cut clean, obviously deliberate. The message was clear. Sam saw it too. Mr. Hale! Ethan, this is because of me. Because you took us in. This is because Garrett's a vindictive son of a bitch. That's not on you. What are you going to do? Ethan looked at the cut fence, at the tracks leading toward Garrett's land, and felt anger burn hot in his chest. The old Ethan would have absorbed the loss, maybe mentioned it to the sheriff, but not pushed. This version of him wanted to ride straight to Garrett's ranch and demand answers. Clara, when he told her, urged caution. If you go there angry, it'll just escalate. Talk to the sheriff first. The sheriff, a tired man named Donovan, listened to Ethan's story and promised to investigate, but his tone made it clear he didn't expect to find anything. Garrett's influential, Donovan said. Hard to make accusations stick without proof. I've got a cut fence and missing cattle. Could be anyone. Drifters, maybe. You know it wasn't. Donovan sighed. Probably. But knowing and proving are different things. Best I can do is have a word with him, let him know people are watching. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Ethan thanked him and left, frustration simmering. That night, sitting with Clara on the porch, he voiced the fear he'd been carrying. What if I can't protect this? What if standing up just makes us a target we can't defend against? Then we defend together. We get help. We don't face it alone. Who's going to help us against Garrett? You'd be surprised. Tom would. The pastor. Others who are tired of how he runs things. She took his hand. You're not as alone as you think, Ethan. You've just been alone for so long you forgot what community feels like. He wanted to believe her, but the cut fence felt like a warning, a reminder of how precarious their position was. They'd built something here, a life, a home, a small community of their own. But it could all come apart if someone with more power decided to tear it down. The thought kept him up that night, staring at the ceiling while Clara slept beside him. He'd spent so long keeping his head down to avoid exactly this kind of trouble. And now, because he'd stood up, because he'd refused to accept Garrett's dominance, he'd made himself a target. Part of him, the old part, the one carved by years of dismissal, whispered that he should apologize. Back down. Find a way to smooth things over before it got worse. But a newer part, the one Clara had helped him find, refused. He'd done nothing wrong. Helping Sam had been right. Speaking up at the meeting had been right. Standing his ground with Garrett had been right. He couldn't control what Garrett did, but he could control how he responded, and he was tired of responding with fear. Beside him, Clara stirred, rolled toward him without waking. Her hand found his in sleep, holding on. That simple touch steadied him, reminded him what he was fighting for. He'd built a life worth defending, and defend it he would, whatever that took. Morning came too early, the rooster's crow piercing through the fog of Ethan's restless sleep. He rose anyway, moving through the pre-dawn routine by muscle memory, feeding animals, checking water, mending what the night might have broken. Sam was already up despite his injury, awkwardly hauling grain with a makeshift crutch he'd fashioned from an old fence post. "You don't have to push yourself," Ethan said. "Need to earn my keep." Sam's face was set with determination. "Especially now, with Garrett making trouble." "That's not your fault." "Feels like it is." Ethan understood the weight of that feeling, the sense that your mere existence caused problems for people who'd been kind to you. He'd carried it most of his life. "Listen to me," Ethan said, stopping Sam with a hand on his shoulder. "Garrett's been looking for an excuse to come after me since I married Clara. If it wasn't you, it'd be something else. Don't carry blame that isn't yours." Sam nodded, but Ethan could see the guilt still sitting heavy on him. Some weights you had to learn to set down yourself. No one could do it for you. By the time Clara emerged, the sun was burning off the morning mist, revealing a sky so blue it hurt to look at. She found Ethan replacing the cut fence wire, his movements methodical and tight with controlled anger. "Any sign of the cattle?" she asked. "No, they're gone." "We should organize a search party, get some of the neighbors." "And say what? That I think Garrett stole them but have no proof? That'll just make me look paranoid." Clara crouched beside him, watching his hands work the wire. "So we do nothing? We fix the fence, we move forward. We don't give him the satisfaction of seeing us rattled." "Are you rattled?" He looked at her directly. "Terrified. But I'm not going to show him that." She nodded, accepting the honesty. "What do you need from me?" "Just keep being you. Keep believing this is worth fighting for. Always." They worked together in silence, repairing the damage, making the fence stronger than it had been before. It felt symbolic somehow, taking something broken and making it better, refusing to let destruction be the final word. When they finished, Clara stood back, surveying their work. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think we should throw a barn raising." Ethan stared at her. "What?" "The barn needs expanding anyway if we're going to grow the herd, and a barn raising brings the community together, shows people who we are, what we're building, makes it harder for Garrett to isolate us." "Clara, that's a lot to ask. People are busy, and we don't have the money to feed everyone properly. We'll figure it out. I'll bake. Marie can help cook. We'll make do. The point isn't perfection. The point is invitation." Ethan turned the idea over in his mind. Barn raisings were traditional, communal events where neighbors came together to help build, but they required social capital he wasn't sure he had. What if no one came? What if they showed up just to judge, to confirm their low expectations? "I see you thinking," Clara said, "and I know what you're thinking. Stop it. You can't read my mind. I've been married to you for months now. I can absolutely read your mind." She stepped closer. "You're worth showing up for, Ethan. And even if only a handful of people come, that's a handful more than you're giving yourself credit for." He wanted to argue, but the truth was he wanted to believe her more than he wanted to be right. "Okay. Okay? Let's do it. Let's throw a barn raising and see who shows up." Clara's smile could have lit the whole ranch. She threw her arms around him and he held her, breathing in the scent of her hair, letting himself believe, just for a moment, that this might actually work. They set the date for 3 weeks out, giving people time to plan and themselves time to prepare. Clara spread the word, mentioning it casually at the general store, at church, anywhere people gathered. The responses were mixed, some genuinely interested, others non-committal, a few openly skeptical. A barn raising? Mrs. Calloway had sniffed. That's awfully ambitious for someone who's only been married a few months. We believe in building for the future, Clara had replied evenly. Well, we'll see who shows up. The unspoken implication hung in the air. Not many, probably. Not for you. But Clara refused to be deterred. She threw herself into planning with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. She and Marie baked for days, stockpiling bread and pies and cakes. Sam, despite his limited mobility, organized tools and materials, making sure everything they'd need was ready and accessible. Ethan worked on the structural plans, sketching out the expanded barn in the dirt with a stick, measuring and remeasuring to make sure his calculations were sound. The night before the barn raising, he couldn't sleep again. He kept running through worst-case scenarios, no one showing up, people coming just to mock, the whole thing collapsing into humiliation. Clara found him on the porch at midnight, staring out at the dark land. "Come to bed," she said. "Can't." She sat beside him. "Talk to me. What if this is a mistake? What if we're setting ourselves up for public failure? Then we fail publicly, and then we get up the next day and keep going. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's survivable." She took his hand. "Ethan, listen to me. Whatever happens tomorrow, we've already won. We built something worth defending. We stood up when it would have been easier to stay down. We helped people who needed help. That's not nothing. It feels like nothing when everyone's waiting for you to fall. Then stop performing for everyone and start living for yourself, for us, for what we know is true." He looked at her, this woman who'd somehow seen past all his inadequacies to something worth believing in, and felt his chest tighten with gratitude and terror in equal measure. "I love you," he said. The words surprised him. They'd never spoken them out loud before, though the feeling had been there for months, growing quietly in the spaces between work and conversation and shared silence. Clara's eyes widened, then softened. "I love you too. I have for a while. Why didn't you say it? I was waiting for you to be ready to hear it." They sat together in the darkness, holding hands, and Ethan felt something settle in him. Whatever tomorrow brought, they'd face it together. That was all the certainty he needed. Dawn broke clear and cool, perfect weather for building. Ethan was up before the sun, nerves making sleep impossible. He checked and rechecked the materials, making sure everything was in place. Sam hobbled out to help, and together they laid out the foundation markers, defining where the new walls would go. "Think people will come?" Sam asked. "I don't know. I hope they do. You deserve it." Ethan didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded and went back to work. By 8 o'clock, they'd seen no one. Clara kept glancing at the road, her expression carefully neutral, but Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders. Marie fussed with the food tables, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. At 8:30, a wagon appeared on the horizon. Tom Brennan and his wife arrived first, tools in hand and genuine smiles on their faces. "Where do you want us?" Tom asked. "You came," Ethan said stupidly. "Of course we came. You think I'd miss a chance to build something?" Others followed. Not a flood, but a steady trickle. Hutchins showed up with 2 of his sons. The pastor came with a group from the church. A few younger ranchers who'd voted for the rotation system arrived together, laughing and ready to work. Even some people Ethan barely knew made the trip, curious or kind or both. By 9 o'clock, there were maybe 30 people gathered. Not the whole town, not even close to it, but more than Ethan had dared hope for. He stood looking at them, throat tight, not sure what to say. Clara squeezed his hand. "Thank them. Tell them what this means." He cleared his throat and the murmur of conversation died down. I'm not good at speeches." "Then keep it short," someone called out, and people laughed. "Right, short." Ethan took a breath. "Thank you for coming, for being here, for—" He struggled, the words inadequate for what he was feeling. "For seeing something worth building." It wasn't eloquent, but it was true, and judging by the nods and smiles, it was enough. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, sawing and hammering and hauling, the barn taking shape with remarkable speed. There was something almost magical about it, watching walls rise from nothing, seeing individual efforts combine into something larger than any one person could create alone. Ethan worked alongside everyone else. No longer the quiet man in the corner, but fully present, offering suggestions and accepting help and feeling for the first time in his life, like part of something bigger than himself. Clara moved through the crowd, making sure everyone had water and food, chatting easily with people who'd dismissed her months ago. She had a gift for it, Ethan realized, for making people feel welcome, for building bridges he didn't know how to construct. Around midday, Garrett showed up. He rode in slowly, deliberately, his presence immediately chilling the atmosphere. Work didn't stop exactly, but it slowed, people glancing over nervously. Ethan straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead, and walked to meet him. Garrett. Hail! Garrett looked around at the assembled crowd, his expression unreadable. Quite the turnout. People are generous. We're easily fooled. The words hung in the air. Ethan felt anger spike, but kept his voice level. Did you come here to help or to cause trouble? Neither. Just observing. Garrett's eyes were cold. Wanted to see how long this little experiment of yours lasts. It's not an experiment, it's a life. Same thing, in your case. Before Ethan could respond, Tom Brennan stepped forward. You got a problem with how Ethan runs his ranch, Garrett. That's between you two. But this is a community event, and you're either here to work or you need to leave. Garrett's jaw tightened. You defending him now, Tom? I'm defending common decency, something you seem to have forgotten. The tension ratcheted up, people stopping work entirely now, watching. Ethan could feel it balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong word, and this could explode into something ugly. I appreciate you coming by, Ethan said carefully, but like Tom said, we're here to build. If that's not why you came, maybe it's best you go. Garrett stared at him for a long moment, and Ethan forced himself not to look away, not to shrink. Finally, Garrett laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You've got stones, Hale. I'll give you that. But stones don't make up for everything else you're lacking. He turned his horse and rode off, kicking up dust. The crowd watched him go in silence. Well, Hutchins said finally. That was unpleasant. That's Garrett, someone else muttered. Tom clapped Ethan on the shoulder. You handled that well. Didn't feel like it. You stood your ground. That's what matters. They went back to work, but the encounter had shaken something loose. People started talking more openly, sharing their own stories of Garrett's bullying, his manipulation, the ways he'd used his power to control and diminish. It became clear that Ethan wasn't the only one who'd felt the weight of the man's contempt. He told me my land wasn't worth what I was asking, one rancher said, then bought it for half value when I got desperate. Fired my brother for asking for fair wages, another added. The stories piled up, each one a small indictment, and Ethan realized something he hadn't before. The town's acceptance of Garrett's dominance wasn't approval. It was resignation. They just needed someone to show them there was another way. By late afternoon, the barn was largely complete. Walls up, roof framed, solid and strong. They'd have to finish some detail work later, but the main structure was done, and it was beautiful in its simple functionality. People stood back, admiring their collective work, and Ethan felt something close to pride. Not the arrogant kind, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing they'd built something good. Clara organized the meal, and they all ate together as the sun started to dip, sharing food and stories and laughter. It felt like community, real and tangible, and Ethan let himself be part of it without the usual voice in his head insisting he didn't belong. As people started to leave, many stopped to shake his hand, to thank him for the meal, to say they'd be back to help finish the detail work. Each interaction chipped away at the isolation he'd carried for so long. When the last wagon had rolled away, and it was just the four of them, Ethan, Clara, Sam, and Marie, they stood looking at the new barn in the fading light. We did it, Clara said softly. We did. Sam cleared his throat. I know I just work here, but thank you for letting me be part of this. You don't just work here, Ethan said. You're part of this place now. All of you are. Marie had tears in her eyes. We won't forget what you did for us. I'm not keeping score. We help each other. That's how this works. After they'd gone up to the loft, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch together, exhausted and satisfied. The new barn stood dark against the twilight sky, solid proof that they were building something that would last. That was incredible, Clara said. It was terrifying. But you did it anyway. We did it. He pulled her closer. I couldn't have done any of this without you. You could have. You just didn't know it yet. Ethan wasn't sure that was true, but he let it stand. The truth was more complicated. He'd needed Clara to show him what was possible, but the actual work of becoming someone different had been his own. They'd built it together, each supporting the other, and maybe that was what marriage was supposed to be. The following week, Garrett made his next move. He filed a complaint with the county about Ethan's water usage, claiming he was taking more than his allotted share under the rotation system. It was baseless. Ethan had been scrupulous about following the schedule, but it required time and energy to defend, pulling him away from ranch work to deal with bureaucracy. "He's trying to drown you in problems," Clara said, reading the official notice. "Make it so exhausting to stand up that you give in." "I know his game." "So what do we do?" Ethan thought about it. The old response would have been to quietly comply, to prove his innocence through submission. But submission hadn't earned him respect before, and it wouldn't now. "We fight it, properly, with documentation and witnesses and everything official. We make him prove his case, and when he can't, we make sure everyone knows he wasted the county's time with a baseless accusation." Clara smiled. "Look at you, thinking strategically. You're rubbing off on me." "Good." They gathered their water usage logs. Clara had been keeping meticulous records since the rotation started, and lined up neighbors willing to testify that Ethan had followed the schedule exactly. Tom agreed to speak on his behalf. Even Hutchins offered to provide a statement. The hearing was held at the county office, a small wooden building that smelled of old paper and tobacco. Garrett showed up with his own documentation, but it was thin, mostly speculation and assumptions rather than actual evidence. The county official, a gray-haired man named Morrison, listened to both sides with obvious irritation. When Ethan presented his logs, cross-referenced with multiple witnesses, Morrison's eyebrows went up. "These are very thorough," he said. "My wife keeps good records," Ethan replied. "So it appears." Morrison turned to Garrett. "Do you have anything to refute this documentation?" "Those could be falsified." "Could be, but you'd need evidence they were, and you don't have any." Morrison closed the file. "Complaint dismissed. Mr. Hale is clearly in compliance. And Mr. Garrett, I'd advise you to be more certain of your facts before filing official complaints. The county doesn't appreciate having its time wasted." It was a small victory, but Ethan felt it resonate through him. He'd fought back, properly and officially, and won. Not through confrontation or violence, but through preparation and truth. Garrett left without a word, his face dark with suppressed rage. Outside, Clara hugged Ethan tight. "You did it! We did it! Same thing." They rode home in high spirits, but Ethan knew this wasn't over. Men like Garrett didn't give up just because they lost one round. If anything, this would make him more determined. He was right. 2 days later, someone set fire to the hay barn. They caught it early, thankfully. Ethan had been up late working on accounts when he smelled smoke. He'd run out to find flames licking up one corner of the old barn, the one they used for hay storage. He'd screamed for help, and Sam had come hobbling out despite his injury, both of them hauling water from the trough in desperate buckets. Clara and Marie had joined in, forming a bucket line, all of them working frantically to contain it before it spread to the new barn or the house. By the time they got it under control, a quarter of the hay was gone and the barn was badly damaged, but it could have been so much worse. They sat in the dirt afterward, soot-stained and exhausted, staring at the smoking wreckage. "This was deliberate," Sam said. "I saw the scorch marks. Someone set this." "Garrett," Clara said flatly. "We don't know that," Ethan said, though he believed it too. "Who else would it be?" "Doesn't matter if we can't prove it." "So he just gets away with it?" Ethan didn't answer. His hands were shaking, not from exertion, but from rage and fear. This had crossed a line. Property damage was one thing, but fire could have killed them all, could have burned everything they'd built. The next morning, half the town showed up. Word had spread about the fire, and people came to help, some bringing lumber, others tools, a few just their labor. They worked together to tear down the damaged section and begin repairs, and the outpouring of support was overwhelming. "This is wrong," Tom said, hammering boards alongside Ethan. "Garrett's gone too far. Can't prove it was him. Everyone knows it was him. The question is what we're going to do about it." "What can we do? The sheriff won't move without proof." Tom was quiet for a moment. Maybe we don't need the sheriff. Maybe we need to make it clear, as a community, that this kind of behavior isn't acceptable. How? Leave that to me. 3 days later, a meeting was called at the church. Not an official town meeting, just a gathering of concerned citizens. Ethan and Clara attended, uncertain what to expect. The church was packed. Tom stood at the front, looking uncomfortable with the attention, but determined. "We all know why we're here," he said. "Someone burned Ethan Hale's hay barn. We don't have proof of who, but we all have our suspicions. And whether it was Garrett or someone else, we need to make something clear. This town doesn't tolerate that kind of violence." "What are you suggesting?" someone asked. "I'm suggesting we stand together. We make it known that anyone who threatens or harms the Hales is going to answer to all of us, not just them." "That's a big ask," Hutchins said. "Garrett's powerful. Going against him has consequences." "So does staying silent." Tom's voice was firm. "I'm tired of watching good people get pushed around by bullies. Ethan and Clara have done nothing but work hard and help their neighbors. They deserve our support, not our cowardice." The words hit hard. People shifted uncomfortably, forced to confront their own complicity in the town's toxic dynamics. The pastor stood. "Tom's right. We've let fear govern us for too long. It's time we remember what community actually means, standing with each other, especially when it's difficult." One by one, people voiced their support. Not everyone. A few slipped out quietly, unwilling to take sides. But enough remained that when Tom called for a show of hands, the majority raised them. "Then it's settled," Tom said. "We stand with the Hales, and we make sure Garrett knows it." Ethan sat stunned. He'd come expecting condolences, maybe some sympathetic words. He hadn't expected this, a community organizing itself in his defense, people risking their own comfort to support him. Clara squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. "See? You're not alone." After the meeting, people came up to them one by one, offering help, sharing their own grievances with Garrett, pledging support. It was overwhelming and humbling and terrifying all at once. Tom pulled Ethan aside. "We're going to talk to Garrett. Make it clear that if anything else happens to you, he'll answer to all of us." "Tom, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do. We all do. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about what kind of town we want to be." The delegation, Tom, Hutchins, the pastor, and a handful of others, rode out to Garrett's ranch the next day. Ethan wasn't invited, which was probably wise. This needed to be the community speaking, not him seeking revenge. They were gone for 2 hours. When they returned, Tom came straight to Ethan's ranch. "Well," Ethan asked, "we made our position clear, told him that the community stands with you, and any further action against you would be seen as an action against all of us." "How'd he take it?" "About as well as you'd expect. A lot of bluster, a lot of denial, but he heard us, and he knows we're serious." "You think it'll stop him?" Tom sighed. "I don't know. Men like Garrett don't like being told what to do, but at least now he knows there are consequences. That's something." It was something. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. The weeks that followed were tense. Ethan worked his land with one eye always watching, waiting for the next attack. But nothing came. Garrett stayed on his ranch, made no more complaints, caused no more trouble. Slowly, carefully, Ethan let himself believe it might actually be over. The real change, though, was in how people treated him. The barn raising and the fire and the community's response had shifted something fundamental. When he came to town now, people greeted him by name, asked about the ranch, treated him like someone whose opinion mattered. It was disorienting. Ethan had spent so long being invisible that visibility felt like wearing an ill-fitting coat. But Clara kept reminding him that this was what respect looked like, and he needed to learn to accept it. "You've earned this," she said one evening. "Stop waiting for permission to occupy space." "I'm trying." "I know, and you're getting better at it." She was right. He could feel it himself, the way he stood a little straighter, spoke a little louder, took up room without apologizing for it. It wasn't arrogance, it was just presence, the simple act of existing without shrinking. By late fall, the ranch was thriving. The expanded barn was complete, the herd was growing, and they'd brought in enough from the harvest to see them comfortably through winter. Sam's leg had healed enough that he could do real work again, and he'd proven invaluable, skilled, dedicated, grateful in a way that never felt obsequious. Marie had become Clara's closest friend, The two women working together in the garden and kitchen, planning improvements and sharing dreams. The baby, named Hope, which felt almost too on the nose but also perfect, had grown fat and happy, her laughter a frequent soundtrack to ranch life. One evening, as they all sat around the dinner table together, Sam raised his glass. To Ethan and Clara, for taking a chance on us when no one else would. To family, Marie added. We're not, Ethan started, then stopped. They were, weren't they? Not by blood, but by choice, by the bonds forged through shared work and mutual support. To family, he agreed, and they all drank. Later, after Sam and Marie had gone up to the loft and the dishes were washed, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch under a sky full of stars. The air was cold, winter creeping in, but they sat close together, sharing warmth. Are you happy? Clara asked. Ethan thought about it. Happy felt like too simple a word for the complicated mix of feelings he carried, satisfaction and fear and gratitude and uncertainty all tangled together. But underneath it all was something solid, something true. Yeah, he said. I am. Are you? More than I ever thought I'd be. You don't regret it? Marrying me, coming here, all of it? Clara turned to face him fully. Ethan, listen to me. I chose you knowing exactly what I was choosing, not despite your quietness or your doubts or your past, but including all of it. You're a good man, a better man than most of the loud, confident ones who think they're hot stuff, and I will never, ever regret choosing you. The words hit him square in the chest, dismantling walls he hadn't even known he was still maintaining. I love you. I love you too. They kissed, slow and deep. And Ethan felt something inside him finally, truly settle. He was enough. Not perfect, not without flaws or fears, but enough. And that was all he needed to be. Winter came in hard, snow falling thick and heavy, transforming the ranch into something out of a storybook. They worked through it, the four of them, keeping the animals fed and the paths clear, maintaining what they'd built against the season's assault. It was difficult work, but it was good work, and they faced it together. One particularly brutal morning, with the wind howling and snow driving sideways, Ethan stood in the barn checking on the cattle. They were warm and safe, sheltered from the storm, and he felt a surge of satisfaction. He'd done this, built shelter, provided safety, created something that could withstand the harsh conditions. Clara found him there, snow dusting her hair and shoulders. You okay? Yeah, just thinking. About? About how a year ago I was alone, convinced I'd always be alone. And now? He gestured around the barn, at the thriving animals, at the ranch beyond. Now I have all this, you, Sam, and Marie, a community that actually gives a damn. It feels impossible sometimes. It's not impossible. It's just what happens when you stop hiding and start living. I couldn't have done it without you. Maybe. But you did do it, Ethan. You chose to change, to stand up, to build something worth defending. I just showed you it was possible. He pulled her close, breathing in the cold and snow smell of her. Thank you. For what? For seeing something in me I couldn't see in myself. You're welcome. But now you see it too, right? He nodded. Most days, yeah. I do. Spring returned, as it always did, melting the snow and revealing the land beneath. The ranch had weathered the winter well, and as the world turned green again, they began planning expansions. More cattle, a larger garden, maybe even hiring another hand or two. The town had changed too, in small but significant ways. Garrett had withdrawn somewhat, still powerful, but no longer unchallenged. The rotation system for water rights had worked well, proving that cooperation was possible. And people had started looking to Ethan for opinions on ranch management, water conservation, community organizing. It was strange, being sought out instead of overlooked. But Ethan was learning to accept it, to offer his thoughts without the usual preface of apology. One afternoon, a young man showed up at the ranch, nervous, hat in hand, looking for advice on starting his own spread. Ethan spent 2 hours walking him through the basics, sharing what he'd learned through hard experience. When the young man left, thanking him profusely, Clara watched from the porch with a knowing smile. What? Ethan asked. You're mentoring now, teaching. just answering questions. It's more than that. You're passing on what you know, helping someone else build something. That's what respected men do. Respected men. The phrase sat strange on him, like borrowed clothes that were slowly becoming his own. That evening, they sat at the dinner table, the four of them plus the young man they'd invited to stay for the meal, and Ethan looked around at the faces gathered there. People who'd chosen to be here, to build something together, to create family where none had existed. This was what he'd built. Not just a ranch, not just a marriage, but a life. A real, complicated, imperfect, beautiful life. You're quiet, Clara observed. Just appreciating. Appreciating what? This. All of it. Everything we've built. She smiled, reached across the table to take his hand. We've built something good, haven't we? We have. Sam raised his glass again. To building. To building, they all echoed. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Ethan stood alone on the porch, looking out at the land he'd worked for so long. The ranch spread before him in the moonlight, solid and real and his, not just geographically, but in every way that mattered. He'd spent so much of his life shrinking, apologizing, trying to take up less space, and all it had earned him was invisibility and contempt. But when he'd finally stood up, when he'd claimed his right to exist fully and build something meaningful, the world had responded. Not everyone, not all at once, but enough. Enough people had seen his worth, supported his efforts, chosen to stand with him. And in the process, he'd learned to see his own worth too. That was the thing they'd never told him. You couldn't wait for the world to validate you before you started believing in yourself. You had to believe first, act on that belief, and trust that the right people would recognize the truth of it. Clara had shown him that was possible. The community had reinforced it. But the actual work of becoming someone different, someone whole, that had been his. He heard the door open behind him, felt Clara's arms wrap around his waist. Come to bed, she murmured. In a minute. What are you thinking about? Everything? Nothing? How different things are now. Good different or bad different? Good. Scary, but good. She rested her head against his back. You know what I'm proudest of? What? Not that you changed, that you had the courage to become who you actually were underneath all the fear and doubt. That's harder than people think. I couldn't have done it alone. Maybe not. But you did do it, Ethan. And now look what you've built. He turned in her arms, looked down at her face in the moonlight. This woman who'd chosen him, believed in him, stood beside him through every difficult moment. She'd been the catalyst, but he'd been the one who actually changed. I love you, he said. I love you too. They stood together on the porch of their ranch, the land stretching around them in all directions, full of possibility and promise. The town had doubted them, predicted their failure, waited for the inevitable collapse. But they'd proved the doubters wrong, not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through steady work and stubborn faith in what they were building. Through choosing each other every single day, even when it was hard. Through creating a life that reflected their values rather than the town's expectations. Red Hollow would never be perfect. There would always be people like Garrett, people who valued power over community, dominance over cooperation. But there were also people like Tom and Hutchins and the pastor, people who believed in something better. And now Ethan was one of them. Not a victim, not an outcast, but a full member of the community. Someone whose voice mattered, whose example inspired, whose life demonstrated that quiet strength was still strength. He'd never be the loudest voice in the room. He'd never be the kind of man who commanded attention through sheer force of personality. But he'd learned that he didn't need to be. He just needed to be himself. Honest, hardworking, kind, willing to stand up when it mattered. And that was enough. It had always been enough. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and beautiful, and Ethan Hale stood on his porch with his wife in his arms, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because the world had finally validated him, but because he'd learned to validate himself. Not because everyone accepted him, but because he'd accepted himself. That was the real victory. Not changing the town's mind, but changing his own. Not proving he was worthy of respect, but learning to respect himself regardless of what others thought. The ranch would continue to grow. Challenges would come and go. Life would be difficult sometimes, beautiful other times. Mostly just the hard work of existing and building and maintaining. But he'd face it all from a place of strength now. Not the loud, aggressive strength the town had always valued, but the quiet, enduring strength that had been in him all along. The strength to keep showing up, to keep building, to keep choosing love and work and community even when it was easier to hide. Clara pulled back slightly, looked up at him with a question in her eyes. "Ready for bed?" "Yeah, I'm ready." They walked inside together, closing the door on the night, and Ethan felt the future unfold before him, uncertain but no longer terrifying, challenging but no longer insurmountable. He'd spent so long being defined by other people's opinions, carrying their doubt like stones in his pockets. But he'd finally learned to set those stones down, to walk lighter, to build something that reflected who he actually was, rather than who they'd told him he should be. And in the end, that made all the difference. The story of Ethan Hale wasn't a story of dramatic transformation or sudden change. It was a story of gradual awakening, of learning to see himself clearly, of building a life one choice at a time. It was a story about finding someone who believed in you, yes, but more importantly, about learning to believe in yourself. It was a story about how quiet strength could triumph over loud judgment, how steady work could build something lasting, how choosing to stand up, even when your knees were shaking, could change everything. Most of all, it was a story about how being enough for yourself was the only validation that ever really mattered. Everything else was just noise, and Ethan Hale had finally learned to tune out the noise and listen to his own voice instead.